Section 1.4, adding and subtracting real numbers. We're going to use the number line to describe how addition works. Let's start with one that's real simple. 2 plus 3. On the number line, to add numbers, we start at 0. We'll move 2 units in the positive direction and an additional 3 units in the positive direction. We land on 5. We're not going to use the number line every time we go to add numbers. This is just to help us visualize what's going on as we begin now adding with negative numbers as well. Let's look at -2 plus -3. Get us a number line. We'll start at 0, and this time we'll move 2 units in the negative direction and an additional 3 units also in that negative direction. That lands us back at -5. Let's do a couple more and then see if we can develop a rule that will allow us to do this without using our number line. Let's consider 2 plus -3. We'll start at 0 and move 2 units in the positive direction. And from where we left off, we're now going to move an additional 3 units, but in the negative direction. That will bring us back to land on -1. And one more. We'll start by moving 2 units in the negative direction from 0. And to that, we're going to add 3 units in the positive direction. This will land us at +1. Now, in the textbook, she gives these rules in blue boxes. Here at the bottom of page 52, blue box, bottom of page 52 says, when I'm adding sign numbers of the same sign, to add 2 numbers with the same sign, add their absolute values. The sum has the same sign as the add-ins. The add-ins are just the members of addition. The 2 and the 3, those are the add-ins. It says add their absolute value and give the answer the sign of the problem. So we had 2 positive numbers that we're adding. We know our answer will be positive. Add their absolute values. Absolute value of 2 is 2. Absolute value of 3 is 3. 2 plus 3 is 5, and it's positive. Here I'm adding 2 numbers of the same sign. So take their absolute values. Absolute value of -2 is 2. Absolute value of -3 is 3. And add them. 2 plus 3 is 5. But these were both negative, so my answer will be negative. On the facing page, page 53 at the bottom, in our blue box, adding sign numbers, different signs. It says, to add 2 numbers with different signs, find their absolute values and subtract the lesser from the greater, and the sum will have the same sign as the add-in with the greater absolute value. In other words, when we're adding numbers that are opposite in sign, we're actually subtracting. We're subtracting their absolute values, big minus little. So 3 minus 2. Subtract their absolute values. 3 minus 2 is 1. and the answer will have the sign of the larger absolute value. 3 is bigger than 2. It was negative, so my answer is negative. And that makes sense. We went further on the number line in the negative direction, so where are we going to land? To the left of 0. We're going to land on a negative number. Apply that rule here. Adding two numbers opposite in sign, we will subtract their absolute values. 3 minus 2 is 1. And give the answer the sign of the larger absolute value. 3 is bigger than 2. It was positive, so my answer must be positive. And again, if you look at that number line, that makes sense. With that in mind, let's do a couple. Consider 10 plus a negative 4. Think about your number line. Think about where you're going to land. I'm adding two numbers that are opposite in sign, so really what am I doing? I'm subtracting. 10 minus 4 is 6. 10 is bigger than 4, so we did what? We went more in the positive direction. My answer will be positive. I'm adding two numbers that are opposite in sign, so I'm really subtracting. In other words, this 7 is going to move us in the positive direction to the right on the number line. The 15 turns around, takes us back the other way. So I want to know what is the difference between those two moves. 15 minus 7, taking the difference of their absolute values. 15 minus 7 is 8. 15 is bigger than 7. It was negative, so my answer must be negative. Picture that on the number line. That makes sense. I'm adding two numbers of the same sign. So on my number line, what's happening? We're moving in the same direction both times. I will add their absolute values. 6 plus 8 is 14. They were both negative. So where did I have to land on my number line? They were both negative, so my answer must be negative. We're going to turn now and talk about subtraction. We have a blue box on page 55. Definition of subtraction. Page 55 in the blue box. For any real numbers x and y, the following holds. X minus y is the same as x plus opposite y. She goes on to say, in other words, to subtract y from x, add the additive inverse or the opposite of y to x. That is, change the subtrahend to its opposite and add. When you're subtracting numbers, you know the answer is called the difference. The first number is called the minuend. Your second number is the subtrahend. And like we said earlier, when you're adding numbers, the two numbers being added together are both called addends. Just more terminology to be familiar with as we go through this algebra. Let's see how this definition works on this very simple problem. This is not how I would work the problem, but let's just see what she means here in the blue box. Instead of subtracting, I can always add. She says 5 minus 2 is the same as 5 plus a negative 2. I'm adding two numbers of opposite signs, so I'm going to subtract their absolute values. 5 minus 2 is 3. 5 is bigger than 2. The 5 is positive, so my answer is positive. Like I said, this is not how we work a simple subtraction problem. You know 5 minus 2 is 3. But this is simply illustrating what the blue box is saying. Another way to put this is to say we're using our double negative rule. In other words, instead of writing this line, I could simply have said, instead of minus a positive 2, this is plus a negative 2. And you'll hear me say, make 2 marks. Make 2 marks to change that subtraction to addition. Let's see how this works on some other problems. Once you get the hang of this, a lot of this you'll be doing in your head. But as we begin, we'll probably make 2 marks most of the time. 4 minus 10. Just think about that. If you had 4 and you take away 10, where are you now? You're 6 in the hole. You're at negative 6. Now, is that what's going to happen when I make 2 marks? I can always change subtraction to addition. Make 2 marks instead of minus positive 10. Make this plus negative 10. Now I'm adding 2 numbers of opposite sign. I will take their difference. 10 minus 4, the difference of their absolute values. 10 minus 4 is 6. And in my addition problem, now that I've made 2 marks, 10 is bigger than 4. The 10 was negative, so my answer must be negative. In this problem, we're subtracting a negative minus a positive. Now, if you just stop and think about this for a minute, you've got negative 7 to begin with, and you take even 3 more away from that. You're further in the hole. You're down at negative 10. What if I use my make 2 marks method, which is our way of using this blue box? Instead of minus a positive 3, make this plus a negative 3. Now I'm adding 2 numbers of the same sign. I will add their absolute values. 7 plus 3 is 10. And the answer takes the sign of the problem. They were both negative, so my answer must be negative. And again, this is why I don't like saying 2 negatives make a positive. 2 negatives don't always make a positive. When I add 2 negatives together, I certainly get a more negative number. Let's try one more. Subtracting these 2 is the same as adding the opposite according to our blue box. Typically, when I see minus minus, I will make 2 marks. These first 2 aren't too bad. Once you get used to this, you'll be doing those in your head. This one, I like making these 2 marks. Instead of minus a negative, this becomes plus a positive. Make 2 marks. Instead of minus a negative, that's the same as plus the positive. So now I'm what? I'm adding 2 numbers of opposite sign. I will subtract their absolute values. 6 minus 2 is 4. 6 is bigger than 2. Checking the size of their absolute values. 6 is bigger than 2. 6 is positive, so my answer is positive. Those are the rules for adding and subtracting real numbers. Adding and subtracting signed numbers. Let's grab some homework problems. Here on page 60, I'm going to jump all the way down to number 22 to get started. Negative 11 plus 11. My instructions will read, evaluate. She says find the sum. And that's fine because this is an addition, but a more generic instruction would be evaluate. Now here I'm adding two numbers of opposite sign, a negative plus a positive. And so I'm going to subtract their absolute values. 11 minus 11. 11 minus 11 is 0. Now think about this. It says to give the answer the sign of the larger absolute value. Which is bigger, 11 or 11? Well, neither. So what sign do I give to my answer? Neither. And what did we say about 0? What's the sign on 0? 0 has no sign. 0 is neither positive nor negative. So that still works. Now you know what I'm going to do next. Let's look at number 24. Can't get away from them. Number 24, we're adding signed fractions. And remember the reason for these parentheses. These parentheses are here only to keep that plus and minus from touching each other. Makes the problem more readable. That's all those parentheses are doing. They're not grouping, they're not multiplying. They're just there to separate these two operative symbols from each other. Negative 1/4 plus negative 5/12. I'm adding fractions. To add fractions, we need a common denominator. Least common for 4 and 12 is 3. Is 12. Least common denominator for 4 and 12 is 12. So what do I need here? I was getting ahead of myself. I need a 3. Top and bottom. The second fraction is ready to go with a 12 already in its denominator. So we now have negative 3/12 plus a negative 5/12. And now we think about our signs. I'm adding two numbers of the same sign. So I'm going to add their absolute values. 3/12 plus 5/12. 3 of them plus 5 of them is 8 of them. 8/12. And the sign of the problem is negative. And so my answer will be negative. Anything you want to say about what I've just done? I would have to count this wrong, but why? Have we made a mistake in the math yet? No. But what do we not do? Anytime. See, we can't get distracted by the sign numbers, by everything else that's going on. We've got to remember that at the end, if it is a fraction, it's got to be in lowest terms. 8 over 12, 8 and 12 are both divisible by 4, so this will reduce to 2/3. Negative 2/3. Now we've got our final answer. On this next problem, I want you working ahead of me. Let's try number 28. So I'll let you go ahead and pause the video here. Once you've got an answer, come back and we'll compare. In order to add fractions, we must have a common denominator. The least common denominator for 10 and 8 is 40. Could I use 80 as a common denominator? Yes. Do I want to use 80 as a common denominator? Probably not. I'd rather keep the numbers smaller and easy to work with. So let's use 40. What do we need here? A factor of 4, top and bottom. And to turn 8 into 40, multiply by 5, top and bottom. And we rewrite the problem now as 36/40 plus a negative 55/40. We have our common denominator, so we're ready to add. We're adding sign numbers. We're adding numbers of opposite signs. So what are we really doing? We're really subtracting. We want to subtract the bigger absolute value minus the smaller absolute value. 55 of them minus 36 of them. 55 minus 36 is 19 of them. 19 what? 19 40ths. And the sign on my answer, 55 40ths is bigger than 36 40ths. The 55 40ths was negative, so my answer must be negative. Again, we're using that concept of the number line to help us picture what's going on in these problems. Number 36. We are still under the order of operations. Like I've said, I never have to mention that again. We know that from this point forward, anything we evaluate is going to have to follow the order of operations. In this problem, how many sets of grouping symbols do you see? Just one, just the square brackets. The parentheses are there to serve only one purpose, and that is to keep this plus and minus from bumping into each other. We're not allowed to write two operative symbols side by side. So the parentheses make this more readable, keeping those two operative symbols apart. We'll start then inside the square brackets. Inside the square brackets, we're adding two numbers of opposite sign, 12 plus negative 3. So what are we really doing? We're really subtracting. Subtract their absolute values. 12 minus 3. 12 minus 3 is 9. 12 is bigger than 3, so the result is going to be positive. Positive 9. Now the only thing left to do is add 6 and 9. 6 plus 9 is 15. Let's tackle some of the subtraction problems from the section. And let's go over to number 58. Negative 9 minus 4. If you just think your way through this, we've got negative 9, and from that we're taking away even 4 more. Where would that land us? That'd be 13 in the whole. My answer here should be negative 13. Let's see what it looks like as we apply our definition of subtraction, which you'll do until you get the hang of doing these mentally. You can always change subtraction to addition. Instead of minus this positive 4, we can write plus a negative 4. Now we're adding two numbers of the same sign. We will add their absolute values. 9 plus 4 is 13. And give the answer the sign of the problem. They were both negative, so my answer has to be negative. Number 62. Anytime I have minus a negative, I almost always make my 2 marks. We can always change subtraction to addition by changing not only the subtraction to addition, but what does that also require? That we take the opposite of the subtrahend. In other words, make 2 marks. Instead of minus a negative, we make this plus a positive. Don't make this tougher than it needs to be. 9 plus 2 is 11. All day. Number 66. We'll work inside the grouping symbols first. inside the grouping symbols, we have 4 minus 11. Now, you may look at that and say, if I have positive 4 in the positive direction, and I subtract 11 from that, I take off 11, I head in the negative direction, where am I going to land? Negative 7. And if that's not working for you, you can always do what? Make 2 marks. 4 plus a negative 11, I'm adding 2 numbers of opposite sign. I subtract their absolute values. 11 minus 4 is 7. 11's bigger than 4. The 11 was negative, and so my 7 will be negative. Strictly speaking, I need parentheses here to keep those 2 minus signs from bumping into each other. But as this is an intermediate step, I don't get too worked up about that. If you don't put those parentheses there, no big deal, because it's part of our scratch work. The only thing left to do is perform this subtraction. We're subtracting a negative. Let's make 2 marks. Make that plus a positive. Negative 3 plus 7. Isn't that just the same as 7 minus 3? Isn't that all that is? 7 minus 3 is 4. Or if we use the rule, I'm adding 2 numbers of opposite sign. I'll subtract their absolute values. 7 minus 3 is 4. The 7 is bigger than the 3. The 7 is positive. So my result will be positive. Let's try one with some fractions. Number 72. We'll start inside the parentheses, and that's all I'm going to focus on. Just those 2 fractions. You might go ahead and find a common denominator for all 3 fractions at once, and that would be fine. I'm just going to focus on the little subtraction in the parentheses, because who knows, it might end up reducing to the point where I'll have an easier time having left this first fraction as 9/10. Let's focus in the parentheses. In order to subtract those 2 fractions, I need a common denominator. Least common for 8 and 10 is 40. I need a 5 here, top and bottom. I need a 4, top and bottom on my second fraction. So now we have 9/10 minus the quantity. 5/40 minus 12/40. I can always make 2 marks when I'm subtracting, still focusing in the parentheses. We can make this plus a negative 12/40. Adding these 2 fractions of opposite sign, which we can do now that we have a common denominator. We will subtract their absolute values. 12 minus 5 is 7 of them. 7/40. 12/40 is bigger than 5/40. It was negative, so this result must be negative. Here again, strictly speaking, parentheses to keep those 2 negatives apart. And now I'm ready to finish the problem. Minus minus, this is just our double negative rule from the previous section, isn't it? Instead of minus minus, we can make this plus plus. Make 2 marks. Instead of minus a negative, make that plus a positive. Now we're just adding these 2 fractions. Well, I am going to need a common denominator. But understand what I was saying before. If this happened to have been something that reduced to so many tenths, well, then I would have already been in business. Or if it reduced to so many 20ths, I could have worked with smaller numbers. Didn't happen this time. So we do need to use a common denominator of 40. So we have 36/40 plus a positive 7/40. Add the tops. 36 of them plus 7 of them is 43 of them. 43/40. Is this in lowest terms? Yes. 43 is prime. Nothing will divide 43 but 1 and 43. So that is in lowest terms. And again, we prefer to see those as improper fractions. Every once in a while we'll want to see a mixed number, but typically in this class, improper fractions are the way to go. All right, let's crank it up just a little. Number 88. Number 88 involves some absolute value. Remember, absolute value signs are themselves grouping symbols. So we have to do what's in the absolute value bars first before taking the absolute value. In my first absolute value bars, I have a subtraction to perform. -4 minus 2. Make 2 marks. Make that -4 plus a -2. I haven't dealt with the absolute value yet. All I'm doing is performing that original subtraction, which I've changed to an addition. -4 plus -2, -6. In the next step, I'll worry about those absolute value bars. Minus absolute value of -8 minus 1. I can make my 2 marks. Make that -8 plus a -1, which is -9. Now the next step, I can deal with those absolute values now. That the things inside have been boiled down to single values. Absolute value of -6 is 6. Minus, notice the absolute value bars have no effect on this subtraction here between them. Minus what? Absolute value of -9 is +9. And then we subtract. Can you do that one in your head? 6 minus 9 is -3. Or you can always do what? Make 2 marks. 6 plus -9 is -3. Here's another one I want you to have a look at on your own, and then we'll compare answers. Number 96. The instructions would read, evaluate. So I'll let you give that one a try. Go ahead and pause the video. When you're done, come back and we'll compare answers. In this problem, we have lots of grouping symbols. We have 3 different sets of grouping symbols. We'll start within the innermost set of grouping symbols first, which in this case is both of these sets of parentheses. In the first set of parentheses, -12 plus 1, -11. Minus -1 minus 9. You want to make 2 marks here, plus a negative. -1 plus -9, -10. Strictly speaking, parentheses here, no longer grouping, but simply keeping those 2 minus signs apart. We've taken care of both sets of parentheses. We're now ready to subtract in the square brackets. So in the square brackets, -11 minus -10, make 2 marks, make that plus +10. -11 plus a +10 is -1. And then finally, -4 plus -1 totals -5. How'd you do? Here at the bottom of this homework page, we find some more translating from English to algebra, which again is going to help us when we get into full-blown word problems in Chapter 2. I want you to notice in your textbook, you do have a couple of charts. Here on page 57, you have a table of words and phrases that indicate addition. They give you examples. On page 58, words and phrases that indicate subtraction. So be sure and look over those if you haven't already. Let's have a go now at number 104. It says, the sum of -7 and -13 increased by 14. Take this a piece at a time. The sum. Well, that indicates an addition. So far, I have written the sum. The sum of what? This and that. So that and is my plus sign. The sum of what? The sum of -7 and -13. Because we were asked to translate, because this will be part of our final answer, I absolutely want to see those parentheses there to separate my plus and minus from each other. So far we've got the sum of -7 and -13 increased by. So whatever that is, to that we're going to increase it, we're going to add to it that 14. Increased by 14. Strictly speaking, I would expect to see grouping symbols here. Because I'm taking this sum, I want to force that to be done first, and I'm increasing whatever that result is by an additional 14. Now these square brackets are superfluous. The problem works out the same with or without them, because I would do this first addition first anyway. But strictly speaking, square brackets belong there. I will count it right with or without the square brackets in this case. They wanted us to translate and simplify. So, here's my translation. That's part of my final answer. And now we want to work this out. Inside the square brackets, or if you didn't write them, you'd do that first addition first anyway. -7 plus -13 is -20. And then -20 plus 14, a total of -6. Let's try one more. Let's try that last one, number 114. It says, 19 less than the difference of 9 and -2. Actually, let's go ahead and write that one as it appears in the book. Let's write that right here on the board so I can see exactly what I'm doing. 19 less than the difference, let me abbreviate, of 9 and -2. Very careful with subtraction. Let's take this a piece at a time. 19 less. What am I doing? 19 less. I'm subtracting 19 from something. So watch. 19 less. 19 subtracted from. 19 subtracted from what? 19 less than the difference. Do you see that so far I have written 19 less than some difference? 19 less than the difference. What difference? the difference of 9 and negative 2. This and is your subtraction sign. It's this guy right here. The difference of 9 and negative 2. I want those two negatives separated from each other. You are welcome to change these outer parentheses up to square brackets. I don't find it necessary. I see nothing wrong with what we have here. I have written 19 less than the difference of 9 and negative 2. Piece at a time is the way to do these. Now they want us to crank this out. Evaluate that expression. I can make 2 marks so as not to mess up my final answer I've already boxed. Let me just copy this. In the outer parentheses, which are our only grouping symbols, we have a subtraction. We're subtracting a negative. Let's make 2 marks. Make that plus a positive. A 9 plus 2, well, that's 11. 11 minus 19, you had 11 to start with. You took 19 away. Where do you land? Think about your number line. You take away 19 from positive 11, you land back here at negative 8. Or if you like, make 2 marks. Make 2 marks. Make that plus a negative 19 if that helps you for now to see what's going on. All right. That's my look at adding and subtracting real numbers. So I'll let you get to that homework set.